Unconventional Soldier, a military podcast brought to you by two British Army veterans in association with ISAR.com.
Welcome to the Unconventional Soldier podcast. Our guest today is James Lee, a former CNCO in the RLC, Royal Logistics Corps, and author of Licking the Taliban's Flip-Flop. James left the army in 2013 after 24 years service and now runs his own flying business. On this podcast, we will be discussing his military career, what inspired him to write a book, and where that title came from. Also, how did he end up dealing with passengers at airheads to teaching people how to fly? So James, welcome to the pod. It's great to have you on. So what inspired you to join the army? And how did you end up in the Royal Corps Transport, then the Royal Logistics Corps?
Hi guys, thanks for having me on your podcast today. Massive fan, so looking forward to this today. So yeah, how did I end up in the army? Well, I left school in 1986 with not many qualifications under my belt, and I went on to the old YTS. Some of you will remember that, the old youth training scheme, or YOB training scheme, I think it was called at the time. And I ended up in my garage in a place where I grew up near in Birkenhead, where I was a car electrician for 2 years. The job was okay. It was fairly interesting. YTS wages, which was basically your dole money. And I did have the promise of being taken on as an apprentice and eventually getting a decent wage. However, I didn't like the dirty garage environment. And I remember speaking to the other mechanics there, and some of them had worked there since all their lives, since they were 16. And these guys were like in the mid-50s now. And I just thought, I don't want to spend, my life in this garage. Anyway, as we came into 1989, the YTS came to an end. And I knew this is the point where I've got to make a decision, and I thought, what am I going to do? So why did I join the RLC? Well, it was the RCT at the time. I initially went down to the recruiting office. I was quite interested in flying then as a young lad, and I thought I'll join the RAF, and as you do, I'm going to be a pilot. Anyway, went to the RAF recruiting office and they were closed. No surprise there. So I went next door. The army welcomed me with open arms, and in I went. So it wasn't a hard decision to make. It's an old cliche, but I wanted to see the world and I wanted to, just get away and experience a bit of life. Now, going back a few years, I initially wanted to join the Royal Marines when I was a little bit younger. I was really, quite keen on joining them when I was about 15, 16. But there was a friend of my older brother. He did 6 years in the Cheshire Regiment. And I remember he got out with no qualifications. Well, he did, but not qualifications he could take over. He was a machine gunner, mortar, platoon. I think the only thing he had that was useful was his driving license. And I thought, I don't really want to do that. So anyway, I went into the recruiting office, and initially I thought I'll carry on as the auto electrician role in the REME, but they weren't recruiting any of them. So I insisted to the guys in there that I wasn't joining the infantry, and they offered me up a job as a driver in the RCT, which was later becomes the RLC in 93. Nobody in my family that's done military service whatsoever. My folks were very, very supportive of me joining up. I had an elder brother who was a bit of a hippie. He wasn't too against it. Wasn't too for it. So joined the RCT, and I did the driver role until about 2001. I had all the fun with driving, and the future as a senior NCO in the driver trade didn't really appeal to me. Round about then, there was a big push to get people to retrade instead of signing off. So I jumped over to the MovCon trade with Easy, and it was still within the RLC.
It's amazing. Your story is quite reflective of a lot of guys like me and Kev who joined up in the 80s, because back then the army was a route out of where you lived and dead-end jobs. And I think youngsters these days probably have a bit more open to them, because people from our background generally didn't go to university either. And university's become a route out for people nowadays as well. Cost you a fortune, was the army cost you nothing. But yeah, I think, Kev, you're probably around about the same. Not where you came from, not a lot of employment back then either.
No, I mean, we had the mass unemployment, but it was also about career prospects. Most people, my family and uncles, my dad and everyone else, they went into a job and they did it for life, so that you could end up being in the factory or in the building trade and do 40 years in the same role, job. And that was the norm. And the armed forces did give me an opportunity. I mean, I wanted to join the Navy when I first looked at it, but there was no places in the Navy.
Oh, that's what they told you.
I was too clever for the Navy, apparently.
So, James, what tours did you do then, mate?
My first posting was 8th Regiment in Germany. I think that was a bit of a bad boy posting because I remember being in the depot, reading out the postings, and they went, Driver Lee, 8th Regiment, and then they looked at me and said, what have you done wrong? So anyway, posted out to Germany, got there just in time to see the Berlin Wall being taken down. Straight into a tour of Northern Ireland almost, tipped up, and the Gulf War One kicked off, and our regiment was pretty much split in two. One of the squadrons went off to the Gulf, and we went off to Northern Ireland, attached to the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders for the first tour, driving the APVs for them. Obviously, they didn't trust them to drive the Land Rovers and the Pigs. That was an interesting tour with the Scottish, and then my second tour was with the Paras. That was totally different. After them tours, it was I got posted off to 7th Regiment in about 94, also in Germany. Thankfully, it was just down the road. Plus, it was a good life in Germany, the old gyros and beer. We loved it. Did a couple of more tours of the former Yugoslavia around 96 to 99, driving fuel tankers, Land Rovers, all sorts, doing emergency runs, taking up plastic knives and forks to Banja Luka because they'd nearly ran out and the NATO mission was about to come to a grinding halt because they were eating with the fingers. And it was round about this time I just thought, right, I've had enough of the driving role. And so I retraded, like I said earlier. After that, I did stints in Marchwood, the port. Interesting job, got to drive a lot of armour unofficially. Folkestone, had a stint in Cyprus, which was great. Got to travel around the Middle East a bit. And then it was back to Germany with a tour of Iraq for the drawdown of Iraq, which was interesting. And then the first tour of Afghanistan, which was actually with the Americans up in Kabul. Really interesting job, but almost sort of pointless. It was during the Obama's troop surge, and they were moving all the kit over the land border, and they thought there's going to be a massive, backlog of gear at the border. And we were monitoring our containers coming over the border. And I'd only been in there about a week, and the Americans were bringing over 400 containers a day, and we were bringing 2. So I don't think there was any problems with that. And then it was off to Cirencester for my last tour, last post in the UK. I requested to come back to the UK to sort my life out. Back to 29 Regiment. It wasn't a particularly good time, and I wasn't interested in working too much. And then the one final tour came up, we need somebody to do the MovCon job out in Kandahar. And I thought, yeah, I'll have a little bit of that. And I popped out there, and that is what the book is all about.
And movement control for our civilian listeners is about moving soldiers and freight from A to B, and specifically your book, and we'll discuss that in detail later on, James, is all about your escapades, if you like, in Kabul, moving people and freight around theatre and actually around the world as well.
Yeah. People don't see this. I think people just think the logistical fairies wave a wand and units suddenly appear all around the world.
It's interesting you talk about Northern Ireland, because the first sort of time I really met a person from the Royal Corps of Transport was in Northern Ireland when they were driving the APVs for us. And I always used to laugh because, like you said, we were told that they were there because we couldn't be trusted to drive them. But I remember Mac, our RCT driver, he used to drive like Lewis Hamilton. Those things were top heavy and dangerous, but he knew how to drive one.
Yeah, that was, what was it at the time? I think I was 19, 20, we weren't any better. I had a car license for about 2 years, and all of a sudden they were like, you're a professional driver, get in that 4-ton top-heavy Land Rover and don't crash it.
So, move on to your book then, mate. Your book has a quote on the back stating, "Not all forces' memoirs are Bravo 20, And I was in a bookshop at the weekend, and if you go to the book section or the military section, especially the contemporary wars, it is all parachute regiment and SAS. And there's not enough books in the market covering what, normal soldiers, and I use normal inverted commas. So I think your book fills a good gap on that. And I also think one thing you bring out, and we already sort of touched on the movement of freight, but, back in Afghanistan at the peak of the deployment in 2010, there were 10,000 troops deployed, of which probably, I don't know, Kev, you reckon about 2,000 were actually doing on fighting on the ground in the FOBs? Because
there've only been 2,000 or 3,000 sort of combat troops as such. The logistics tile in Afghanistan was huge.
Yeah. So, and it just shows you how the importance of logistics and keeping the fighting troops going. But I read your book just before Christmas, I think it was, James, and that's when I got in touch and asked you to come to the pod. But the reason I got in touch was it reminded me a bit of Spike Milligan, and also a guy called Eddy Nugent, who wrote a book called Map of Africa, and also another one called Picking Up the Brass, and they're very much in the vein of yours, that sort of comedic value about the army life. So, have you read any of Spike's books or Eddy's books, and did they influence you in any way?
Unfortunately, I've not read Eddy's books, but I have got it in my list of things to do. I saw it a while ago, and I think I'll get them ordered soon, and I'll get reading them. Spike Milligan, read him from a young age. His books were around the house. I think me dad was a bbig fan of him, so I read him from a really young age, and they were a big influence on me, and I think that shows in the book. I think also I read too many war comics as a kid, and I thought that the military was just about being totally military, and in between the massive battles that were always with the Germans. But Spike's books, he was at war, but it was more like him and his mates just enjoying life. They were in the North African desert. The situation we're in, they were musicians as well, so the things they got up to, it was brilliant. And it just got me to think that combat. Even though even Spike was in combat, he still makes light of it. I'm not making light of the combat, but it was just him and his mates having a laugh. And he mentions a lot, the military waiting. And I remember thinking, what's that? When I joined the army, I soon got introduced to military waiting. I've also noticed that most military books, like you said, you go into the shops and it's all the front line. It's the Paris of the SF and stuff. And I get that. That's what's going to sell. I'm not wanting to take away what they've experienced or achieved. It is pretty impressive stuff. But, as we said, only 2,000 or 3,000 of the troops on the front line were doing the nasty stuff. So not everyone in the army is in the SF, or, for example, not everyone in the pilots is not in the RAF. Not everyone in the RAF is a pilot. I've been called a Renf a few times, mainly on social media. Some of them a bit of a jokey, some of them not so much. But we've all got our role to play in the bigger picture. That is why the British forces work. You look at some of the things in history, and when they've neglected logistics, everything's fell apart. And unfortunately, some of these roles aren't in the least bit exciting or sexy, but they've got to be done. If they don't do it, the armed forces will cease to function. And we won't get these operations done.
Totally agree, mate. And I think it's a reflection on the people saying that to you, because we had a good podcast with a guy called Jimmy Moran, who was with 3 Para at Mount Longdon. And one of the things that came out in Jimmy's podcast was how much he praised people like the cooks, the Remy guys, the supporting staff, the clerks, who ended up running ammunition up that mountain in support of the infantry guys who are doing the tip of the bayonet stuff. But when he Kev, Jimmy was really effusive in his praise for those supporting troops.
Massively. And also they were taking casualties back down the hill as well.
Yeah. And
they were as essential as the infantry at the front fighting, because they were as much in the thick of it as anyone else without all the training.
Yeah, it's we've all got to you've all got to sort of focus towards that one goal. I had an anecdote a few years ago about a cleaner from NASA, and they were talking about how they're trying to get everybody on side. And it was during the Apollo era, and they were asked, I think it was the president came to visit, and he said, what do you do? And he said, I helped put a man on the moon. That's what I did. And he was the cleaner, and he's, yes, if he didn't clean the offices or whatever he was cleaning, things could have soon changed.
Yeah.
Well, I think we spoke about this before, about Afghanistan. There was a definite change with the logistics piece, with the combat logistic patrols that were going out from the bastion or wherever it was they were going out from, out to all of the patrol bases, all the FOBs, and providing that logistical support. But for them to get there, they had to take their convoys through all of the insurgent held territory. They were exposed to all the same risks, all the same dangers. They were contacted, they had the IEDs. So I think the days of people staying in the rear and never being exposed has gone. I think the world has changed. The logistics is just as important, and will, when there's omnidirectional battlefields, when the front line's not so clear, will be exposed. So the logistics corps every week was going back out and they were doing it on their own. They were supporting themselves and having to fight their way through.
Yeah, I mean, they're not called the really large corps for no reason. I mean, in the mover trade, there was only, I think it was about 350 of us in total when I was serving. And we work in small debts, but, we were all over the world. And we were, I think at that time, or when I first came over, it was 2005, we were still supporting Herrick and Tellick at the same time. And it was a big job, it was a big job working with everybody. And we are backed up. The movements trade was backed up by huge contingents of, civilians, civil servants who help us in making things happen, placed all around the UK. Some of these departments are huge.
Well, you should have all got medals, mate, because I used to admire your courage when you used to come out in front of 200 soldiers and go, "Sirs, ma'ams, ladies and gents, the TriStar VC-10 or aircraft of your choice, it's not flying." Then have to make an escape before you're beaten to death.
Yeah, we should have just said, it's not flying because we've broken the plane on purpose. I put some sugar in the fuel tank.
So, James, what made you write the book and how did you go about it?
Well, I've always been interested in writing, and like I said earlier, I left school with not many qualifications under my belt, and English not being one of them. But the army, they teach you to write a little bit, they educate you. I went out my way and did some English courses, GCSEs and A-level, while I was serving. So, the military, I was getting paid to do it, so I was quite happy with that. When I got out of the army in 2014, I started a creative writing course locally, just out of some interest. And for some homework one night, we did a piece on military, or I did a piece for homework on military logic. And what I used was the old, when we got issued a hat for a Herrick tour, and it was like a baseball cap. Some people might remember this, a DPM baseball cap, I think it was. Anyway, we got issued it, and they said, "You're not allowed to wear that." So I just thought, this is just bizarre. This is somebody somewhere has decided they didn't like it, so you're not taking it. So I expanded on the time and effort and the money that had been spent on a contract with a company who would get paid regardless whether we were or not, so they didn't care. But, the hat was perfectly suitable for the job that needed to do, which was being a hat. It was just bizarre. And it's sort of like these hats were left behind in the UK that we weren't allowed to take them. I then jumped over to early in my career and told them about the Hairy Mary shirts. These were an issue shirt, and they were like sandpaper. They were awful to wear, and also the, what were they called? The crisp packet waterproofs, I remember. I remember going out in the field in them, and it was like wearing a bin bag. If you fell asleep in them, you woke up soaking wet. And yet we see the RAF at Bryce Norton on the gate doing one guard duty every year, and they would have Gore-Tex. It was awful. So I just explained this logic and the kit we had, and how some of it should have been banned, or we should have refused to wear it because it wasn't really fit for purpose. At the time we didn't realise it. And no doubt somewhere a senior officer has probably got an MBA out of this for setting it up. I'd love to find the guy who did the procurement for the Hurdy Murdy shirts, because I'd just make him wear one for a week.
The shirt. I think the proper name was Shirt KF. Khaki field, I think, wasn't it? Used to sandpaper your nipples off, didn't it?
It was awful. And anyway, the class that I read this out to, it was made up with a good mix of people. We had old ladies, teenagers, a couple of unemployed people. We had an ex-actor, and we had a couple of guys who I think they were on the wrong course. I think they were meant to be doing bricklaying, but they ended up on this course. But I had them all laughing. And they all encouraged me. They said, "You should take this further." So I gave it some thought, quite a bit of thought, as writing a book is a huge, huge task. And then I thought about my kids too, because I thought, my kids just saw me disappearing off for months at a time, and they're probably thinking, where's he gone? What's he been up to? So, I thought they came into it, and I thought I could write about it, and they could hopefully read about what the dad was doing every time he disappeared out of their lives for months on time. The writing of the book, it's a big old task. So what I used to do, I used to write in the mornings because I found my brain was still a fairly bit fresh. I would do more writing in the winter due to the old flying job being quite seasonal. So I achieved quite a lot. But this was completely new to me. I've not written a book before. There's no manual out there. If you contact anybody and says, "What have you got any tips?" They'll just come back to you and just say, "Get writing." So I used to pop over to my old pub and in the morning before they serve the booze and get a coffee and just crack on. And what I did, I penned down all the bits I could remember. Thankfully, I did keep a few notes while I was out there, which was a huge, huge help. And I just started writing it in no particular order and penning this stuff down and just getting the words down on the paper. But I soon discovered, I had a continuity problem. So I'd go back and read it, and I would be writing, or I could be writing about a conversation that I'd had with a character. But then just a couple of days later, they'd gone on R&R, but then I carried on speaking about them as if they were there. So that was a big issue. So as I got more and more words down, I did turn to Twitter for advice, and other than the usual, just get writing. I said, okay, I'm writing, guys. How do I keep it on? So a few people gave me a few ideas, and I decided to put it into like a diary format. And then I continued to write it from there on in the diary format. As the book came towards the end, I'm thinking, right, I need to get this out there. So again, turned to Amazon and spoke to a few people. And the way ahead for a new author seems to be the old through Amazon, doing the self-publishing. Trying to get a literary agent or a publishing deal is nigh on impossible. New writer, you don't know who you are. It's not going to happen. So I cracked on with that, and I asked about, and I got myself an editor. So that was money well spent. It was a guy called Gary Bainbridge from Bus Stop Editorial Services, and he's brilliant. He was really good, and the good thing was this guy was a civvy. So what I would do is I would get a chapter together and I'd fire it off to him, and he would come back to me and he would sort of pick up the usual, yeah, this doesn't make sense. But he would also ask things, being a civvy, what's this mean? What the hell's black nasty? I haven't a clue what that is, the black tape. So I'd have to explain it, because I've tried to write this for the old civvy market, so to speak. I know the military guys love it, but I have tried to do it for the civvies to just explain what goes on. Yeah. He also did the TypeScript for me, which I believe is a big thing, and the cover design. Brilliant. So he did a lot for me. And I say, if you ever think about doing a book, it's money well spent. But it took me from 2015 to its publication in 2021 to write it. And I'll not lie, it was probably one of the hardest things I've done. It's a big, big thing. But the joy, I'll tell you what, when you get that first copy and you hold the book in your hand, that really, really is something.
Obviously, I read your book, and you can see the effort that's gone into writing it, because you're not just telling, swinging the lantern and telling us a war story, if you like. But it really was quite evocative in places. You were talking about the sunsets and the weather conditions, and I think that really holds it together. And also, you take the mickey out your colleagues, but it's not cruelty. I was just wondering, did you get permission to discuss them in a book, or did you just crack on and hope they wouldn't take offence?
The ones I could track down, as I write in this book, and they said, yeah, crack on. The ones I couldn't track down, I've changed the names. I can't be doing getting a letter off a lawyer and saying, "Oi, you've been saying these horrible remarks about this person." So, yeah, the old, the names have been changed to protect the innocent.
What we're going to do now then, we're going to do a little first for the podcast. We're going to read some passages from James's book that we've picked because they resonated with us and have a little bit of a discussion with them. So I'm going to do the first one. So we're getting a bit here on Why Literary Festival. And I don't know, just over Christmas here, I don't know if you knew or if you saw it, but there was quite a lot of stuff in the papers and on the news about the state of married quarters getting flooded out, the absolutely atrocious response from Pinnacle, which is a civilian company who is in charge of looking after them now. So basically the army farmed out, well, all three services farmed out the maintenance of property to a civilian company about 20 years ago. And in my experience, a lot of this stuff gets done to save money at the expense of the soldier, airman or matlow experience, i.e. the quality of life. And I was reading this paragraph in James's book about food in the army, and that resonated to me. Making things cheaper, but not necessarily better for the experience of the person. Gone are the days of the messes being run by the Army Catering Corps. They're all run now by companies with names like Sodimexo or Elia Saw You Coming, with a view to making profits at the expense of taste. This is unlike the era of the slop jockey, which adopted the more simple approach of making food at the expense of taste. In the good old days, and this term is questionable as I remember canvas webbing, plastic waterproofs and vague health and safety policies, every soldier who lived on the camp paid a flat monthly rate for food, and is entitled to 3 meals a day. This has included as many seconds, thirds, fourths, and sometimes fifths as they could physically put away. The married soldiers were also entitled to as much food when they were on duty, and I heard instances of them bringing their kids in to fill up on grub. This practice was commonly known as bean stealing, and the new system stopped all of the above dead in its tracks. And that really rang home with me because, especially in Germany, when you were all together with your mates all the time, going to scoff on an evening or a weekend after a night on the pop was a big thing. You'd all go round, gather everybody up, and off you go at the cookhouse, and you could eat as much as you want. And when they started talking about this round about the early 2000s, just before I left in 2007, everybody else was saying this is going to be a disaster. But, we're overruled. And we weren't helped by a lot of the younger soldiers saying, why am I paying for 3 meals a day when I only eat one? But
Yeah.
a lot of those soldiers were running out of money before the end of the month and couldn't eat.
Yeah, I remember we did experience it in Germany in the 90s. We had a camp, an American camp just down the road from us in Munster, and we used to do duty driver for them. And they had this save as you starve scheme there. And I think on paper people went, oh, that looks quite good. And it was almost like the grass is greener in it, and it's once you've lost something, you don't know you've lost it. And it was definitely a step backwards. But I remember a lot of people, like you said there, were complaining about having to pay for 3 meals while they're only eating one. Yeah, it was a real shame. And whether they get it back again, I don't know. But, the military, or the MOD, they can penny pinch sometimes really, really badly.
Yeah. I mean, back in the late 90s, I think it was £3 a day or something, the charge. It was literally nothing. But soldiers being soldiers just want to save money. And now they're sat in their single man rooms, never mixing on the PlayStations, and
pity.
And you lose that when you have chefs working for your army catering corps and such like, because obviously they're on exercise and operations with you as well. They're part of the regimental piece. But when you've only got a few there now in a cookhouse, when you've got obviously civilian contractors, they don't have that same rapport.
Yeah. No. It's a shame, and I mean they've done it in it's not just Pinnacle and the catering. I think the tank transporters had it as well. I believe I might be wrong, but it came in a lot of places. But it's almost like it's the future, isn't it? Or it was then anyway. They were going to contract everything out.
That's true, and once it's done, it's done. They'll never rein it back in because it just doesn't happen once it's been through there.
Well, you're never going to get the soldiers back to backfill all those posters either.
No,
because the Army Carrying Corps was quite a large corps in itself.
Yeah,
if you remember, I mean, it had its own cap badge. It was its own corps, and every regiment had a master chef and all the rest of it. In the same way you have REME, it was a big corps. Had a career transition from not being able to cook to get to the top, where you still couldn't cook, still couldn't pass the hardest course in the armed forces, which was learn to be a chef. And
it wasn't one sausage only then. It was as many sausages as you want.
So, Kev, what extract have you picked?
So my readings from his book is. Once the loadmaster has done his safety brief through a megaphone, because Hercs are not the quiet planes as depicted on films, where you can have a normal conversation even on the ground next to him, he gives us the thumbs up to bring them over. The side door on the minivan slides back, and out pops 2 of our enemy. They are tiny, and I think for a minute they're possibly children. They're wearing our desert camouflage body armour and helmets. This again is a requirement under the Geneva Convention, that we offer them the same protection that we have ourselves, and the above attire was a standard requirement on all flights. The guards led them out of the tiny van by their hands, which are bound together in front of them with plastic cuffs that are really oversized cable ties. Another guard guides their feet onto the tarmac because they're blindfolded. I'm getting bored, so I try to initiate some discussion. Would you lick a Taliban's flip-flop for £5? I asked. No way, you sicko, replies Joe. Would you lick a Taliban's flip-flop for £500? Stop it, you're making me feel ill. Would you lick a Taliban's flip-flop for £5,000? Which side? Oh, you're so cheap.
And that's how you got the title for your book, James, is that correct?
It is. It was... as you know, it's a lot of waiting around, so you start talking about some weird stuff, Yeah, that jumped out to me, and I thought that's what it needs to be called. It's something a bit different, and it's not got a call sign in the in the title.
I think what's interesting about that paragraph is that it shows you, I think, the difference in attitudes, because you're seeing these prisoners being transferred at Kandahar. And I would imagine that the guys who took those prisoners at the point of contact would have had a slightly different attitude towards them. So I think what it highlights for me is how circumstances can dictate your attitude to the enemy. You're quite taken aback by them. You felt a bit of sympathy for them. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, these guys, like I say, they were blindfolded and handcuffed, and you can't help but feel sympathy. They looked really, really vulnerable. This was the first time I'd come into contact with any of the enemy. Didn't when I was in Kabul, so it was one of them defining moments, and that's why I wrote about it, because it stuck in my memory. We moved them almost on every other flight, so it all sort of merged into one. But when you see these guys. I'm only human. I did feel a little bit of sympathy, but, turn the tables, give them an inch, and these guys would probably, they'd have you in an orange boiler suit with a rusty kitchen knife to your throat before you could say which side of the flip-flop can I lick.
Yeah. But I think it's such a complicated thing, this, because you hear about prisoners being mistreated, and then on the other hand, I read, and I know Kev's read this book I'm going to mention now, 3 Days in June by James O'Connell, about a fantastic book about the Battle for Mount Longdon. And in that book, it's describing how they took Argentinian prisoners, and even despite that being a horrendous battle, James and his colleagues described taking those prisoners, saying they felt sorry for them and even gave them scoff. So I think even in the heat of battle, soldiers can show a bit of empathy. Sometimes it goes the other way, but that's just the nature of war.
Yeah. I think it. If you look in history, it goes both ways. You look at the Second World War on the Western Front. It was generally, they were adhering to the Geneva Convention, but you looked on the Eastern Front, and it was anything went. Yeah,
same over in the Far East with the Japanese. No prisoners majority of the time. So, James, we asked you to look at a couple of passages that you liked. Can you just give us a couple of readings then?
Yeah, sure. So the first one I'm going to read was from the middle of Feb. Now, I did find that whenever you mention to anybody you're in Afghanistan, maybe the civvies, they just said, it must have been hot out there. There was a winter out in Afghanistan, so I thought I'd just write a little bit about the winter. So I'll start here. So it was Wednesday, the 1st of Feb. I always thought February was a dreary month back home, but it's nothing compared to out here. The deep blue skies, the sunshine, the cold, dry air had left us in late January to be replaced with the silver nitrate-coloured clouds and a slight rise in temperature. This change in weather had also brought with it rain, dampness and dullness. The water-filled clouds that covered the sky block out the usual yellow light that we became accustomed to when it was overcast but dry. There isn't normally a wide spectrum of colour to be found in CAF, and now this is magnified by this dreariness. The weak beige-coloured dust had turned into a brown mud with the addition of the rain, and we are now constantly covered in sludge from the knees down. This limited range of colour that we are being treated to is restricted even further to just 2 shades of brown. Big, dark brown clumps of mud that stick to our boots, and the watery splatter of light brown mud that decorates the bottom part of our trousers. The mud on our boots is brought into the office, even with rigorous stamping of feet on the wafer-thin mats as we come into the main building. These clumps fall off, they dry and return to dust. Our Afghani cleaner brushes this up and puts it into a bin bag and throws it into a skip where it will be sent to landfill. I think, could this be a long-term strategy by the enemy to relocate the whole of CAF to the local tip? Everything is damp, really damp. My uniform feels damp. In the office, it feels damp. In the pickup, it feels damp. Even when I pick up a pen, it feels damp. Everyone I see around CAF seems to walk about with a hunch, which gives the impression that they have the weight of the world on the shoulders, while looking damp at the same time. The rain that falls is mixed with dust, and I can see this on the white paintwork of the pickup as the coffee-tinted water splashes on the bonnet. The wipers manage to keep the windscreen clear, but there's always a dirty smear left. So, I just tried to reiterate a little bit on, how not very colourful it is out there, and it's wet.
Yeah, and I think anybody that's spent time in Afghanistan or Iraq, when they fly back to Brize Norton, when they eventually get home, and you're sort of coming into land, and the variety of colour and the greens and how vibrant everything looks it's a real contrast. So that drabness you're describing, I think most soldiers will be able to relate to that.
Yeah, that's another point I remember, looking out the window as you drop through the clouds over Oxfordshire. Yeah, the different types of green. We're out there, it was just different types of beige.
Yeah. Another thing I always remember is smells. You'd get on a civilian flight at, where was it? You used to get the RAF would take you to some place in the Middle East, at Doha, I think. Was it that your connecting flight was?
Yeah, I think there was Al Udeid as well at one point.
Al Udeid, yeah. And you get on a civvy flight there, and I'm going to sound like a right pervert now, but the air stewardesses and that would be coming along and smelling a perfume, and just that, a nice smell for a change.
Yeah, especially after Kandahar, people who served there must remember the old, the sewage pond, the poo pond, which I think was, the engineers did us proud, and they managed to build it upwind from wherever the wind was blowing. So 6 months of smelling a sewage farm was, it was pretty rough. And you said when you suddenly got into a civilian environment, on a civvy charter flight with some air stewardesses, it was like, wow, it was just, sensory overload for the nose.
That's exactly what it was, yeah, sensory overload. And it made you very much aware how much you stunk as well. So what was your second paragraph, James?
So the second paragraph, we used to get the old IDF indirect fire from the bad guys out there. And one thing anybody who served out there will probably agree with me, your reaction to the incoming fire, because you remember the old IA drills, it was get down on the floor, hands over the head, wait for it to pass. But people's reaction, I found out there, differed from depending where they were on the tour. So the first one I'm going to read is from 1st of Jan. It was New Year. So I was about 2 months into the tour, and it was an attack that we had. So it's just a short paragraph. And then I'm going to jump to a second paragraph that was during my last hours in Kandahar. And, people should be able to realise or, notice what's going on here. So Sunday, the 1st of Jan. The new year starts with a bang, about 3 of them in quick succession. I'm in bed and I carry out the immediate action drill of not doing any immediate actions by staying still. My reasoning for this is that I can see the condensation of my breath, which makes my brain decide that it's better to risk death slightly than get out of bed and risk being cold highly. So yeah, the old rockets come in and you're thinking, it's cold, I ain't getting out of my pit. So the second one, I'll give you the date. It was written towards the end of the tour, and it was Monday, the 14th of May. This was literally my last night in theatre. We book ourselves onto the first Herc out of CAF in the morning, which means a very early start for us all. With the excitement of our impending departure, I hardly sleep at all, and I'm wide awake even before my alarm went off. The Taliban have one final go during the night with one last rocket attack, and this is the last one I will ever experience. I'm straight on the floor with my hands over my head. The last few hours here aren't the time to be taking chances. I hear Geordie follow my end of tour overcautious reaction as he crashes to the floor, muttering something that sounds like, "Oh God, man." So yeah, I think a lot of people can connect with that, when you've been there a while. I think when you first get there and you first hear the alarm go off, you're on the ground. After a while, you're thinking, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And then towards the end, you're thinking, I'm not taking any chances. They fired these rockets into CAF, which had a population of, I think it was about 30,000 in total. And while I was there, they managed to kill 2. So, there was more people died of heart attacks while I was there than got killed by IDF. But it wasn't time to take chances, And yes, you get complacent, as we all do.
It's that self-preservation. But Kev and I both worked for a couple of companies when we left the army. We both ended up working in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I remember one time I got a phone call from a deployment manager out there. And one of the guys we employed was refusing to carry out the IA drills. And this came in a report, and I duly had to report it to our risk committee. And they said, why isn't he not doing it? And we said he's been trained, he's been given the right kit, but he's refusing to do what he's told. And I was told straight away, get him on a plane and get him out of there. Because if something happens to him, we're liable. And that, to me, was a real wake-up call for me between risk in the army and risk for a civilian aerospace company, if you like. It really, the days of the army, he's an idiot. If he gets wounded, it's his fault.
Yeah.
As opposed to, we're not wanting sued, get him out of there.
Yeah.
And you had the same, Kev, with some of the people you were managing out there, weren't you?
Oh yeah, and we had to make them do it, and they had to do it because of the liability piece. Because if anything happened to them, if they were killed, it was their families that potentially would be suing defence.
Yeah, and especially if you knew you weren't doing the drills.
Yeah. Because they'll say, well, was they taught it? Were they doing it? And why weren't they doing it? And what was you doing? It's like everything else. What did you do to enforce it? And if you didn't show it, then you became liable as a company.
Yeah. It's a funny old thing to experience. You hear that alarm, don't you? And you've got 3-4 seconds, and you just lie there waiting for the bang. Sometimes they were far away. Sometimes they were close. Sometimes you never heard anything. I think it always went through in your mind, what if, and then as soon as you heard that bang far away, you just carry on with, right, back to work.
When we had Liz from, what's Liz's last name? I've just forgotten. I've got a right old man's moment here. Liz McConaughey. There we go. Jesus Christ, my Alzheimer's is kicking in. We had Liz McConaughey in, who wrote a book called Chinook Crew Chick, and she was a guest a couple of episodes ago. But she made an interesting comment about IDF. She said, and basically getting in contact when she's on the Chinook, she's saying she described it as a normality bar. It'd start off with one IDF or one contact, and then it slowly creep up, and you just get used to it. She said, but then people would turn up whose normality bar was very, very low, and they'd react totally different to what you would, because your normality bar had increased over time. So I thought that was quite an interesting way that she described that.
That's actually quite a dangerous thing. I do flying, and that has been brought up in aviation. When the abnormal becomes the normal, that's when things happen. People get hurt, accidents happen. There was a big report into the shuttle disaster. Was it the one that blew up after takeoff? And that's quite an interesting read. You can find it on the internet. And they had the problem with the O-rings, and it just became. Yeah, it'll be fine. We always do it this way, but we never used to do it, but we do it. And off it went. And, ultimately, the spaceship blew up and killed all the astronauts.
Yeah, it's a sticking plaster solution that no longer sticks, isn't it? It becomes normal practice. Yeah, that's it. So have you got another one for us, James, or was that your last one there?
No, that was the last one, yeah. It was about 3 in total.
Cool. Right, I'm going to finish off then with an epilogue, which captures how you felt when you left the army after 24 years. Now, I did 22 and Kev did 23, and I think both of us could really identify with this paragraph. I left the army on the 5th of August 2013, exactly 24 years to the day that I walked through the gates to report for my basic training at Buller Barracks in Aldershot. My final act of military exertion was the handing in of my ID card to a board clerk in the regimental headquarters. He couldn't even manage a smile that morning, which I presumed was because he was jealous of me with his years ahead of him. I walked outside, got in my car, and unceremoniously drove out through the gates of 29 Regiment, never to return again. The brass band, clapping crowds, and company organising the firework display had obviously got stuck in the traffic that morning. I started the transition process that would take me from serving soldier to Mr. Civilian earlier that year. It involved such exercises as CV writing, interview techniques, and meetings with people like my old school career advisor who are as uninterested in doing their job now as much as way back then. The new professions that they would suggest for me with my logistical background were exciting areas, their words not mine, such as warehouse or project management, health and safety, or other generally dull-sounding jobs. I was dying inside little by little every time they made a suggestion, as this is supposed to be an exciting time with a reboot of a life out of the military rut that I'd unintentionally settled into. I really just found it all rather depressing. I've always been a great believer in things happening for a reason, and I tried to convince myself that something would turn up eventually. And that resonated with me, and I hope the service that military people get now is a lot better than you described there, James, and I and Kev experienced, because basically I think it's just a tick box exercise in my experience. I fell for the blurb from the guy that was advising me, and I did a project management qualification. A friend of mine, when he was getting out, I said to him, what are you doing for your transition? And he said, they had a building course that taught a bit of paint and decorating, a bit of plumbing, a bit of everything. And I said, well, you're never going to get a job in a building site. And he said, I don't want a job in a building site. I just want to be able to look after my own house. And I speak to him now, 15 years later, and he's put what he learned on that to way greater effect than I ever did a project management qualification. So what did you do, Kev?
I was supposed to be the project manager and I did HUV, but I never used that either.
Yeah.
I think I think the advice is poor. I mean, that's my general impression of resettlement. They try and fit you into a number of easy boxes, like you say, warehouse, factory, transport, a lot of logistics stuff, because they reckon the armed forces logistical preparation is very, very good. No matter what cap badge you are, you can manage stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's lazy resettlement, or it was lazy resettlement.
Yeah.
And everyone was going, unless you had your own idea and you were going to spend a bit of your own time and your money, the courses and the allowances, or the money given for the courses, all fitted around those 20-so courses provided by those 20-so providers who've been doing this forever, providing the armed forces with resettlement training.
Yeah.
And looking back, cash cow.
Absolutely, mate. And looking back on it now, I would say to people, aim high, and that's what you did, James. You aimed high because 20 odd years ago, you'd walked in, tried to join the RAF. You always thought about, you had this dream of being a pilot, and that's exactly what you did. So, just how did you end up being a flying instructor?
Well, like I said, I'd always wanted to fly. Unfortunately, it's out of reach of most people, and I thought, the RAF weren't going to take me. Looking back, I wouldn't have made it into the RAF. I don't think I've quite got the aptitude for a fast jet pilot. But yeah, anyway, when I was in Cirencester, thankfully, we just had down the road was the RAF Line and Flying Club. We're based in Lyneham. They were based down in Kemble Airport. And I popped down there because in my last 6 months, I was on gardening leave, and I suddenly found myself with a bit of time and a bit of spare cash. So I started some lessons initially, and I thought, yeah, I'll get my private pilot's license. And I managed as well to put one of my LCAS, remember the old grants? I think it was about $2,500. Yeah. And I used that towards it. So, that paid for a bit of it. Anyway, the instructor who was teaching me he was air dispatch. And he was getting out fairly soon, and he had got his instructor rating many, many, many years ago. And he said, why don't you become a flying instructor? Now, the route to flying instructor is quite a long one. You've got to build the hours, and then you've got to basically get a commercial pilot's license because it's you're being paid to fly. And when he put this to me initially, I just thought, you're having a laugh, aren't you? Me, commercial pilot, I'm thick as mince. Anyway, he told me you should really go for it. So one of the issues I did have, I'm slightly colourblind, as I looked at going air dispatch myself many, many years back in the 90s. And we did the old test, you remember the numbers with all the dots. And I looked at that and they went, no, you're colourblind, you're never going to fly. So I thought, what, I'll go and get the commercial medical, and if I pass, I'll do it. Anyway, I went down there and they said, yeah, you're a bit colourblind, but technology's come on now. We don't use the old looking at the dots anymore. We've got these computerised things. So I did a computerised test, and they said, yeah, you're colourblind, but you're good to go. You're not actually that colourblind, just marginally. So as soon as I got the Class 1 medical, as they call it, I started building the hours. So that was brilliant, just flying around the UK, building experience. I then had to go off to school for 6 months to do the ground-based exams, which was pretty hard. It's degree level. Somehow I managed to get through it, taught myself algebra and trigonometry off at YouTube, which is a great tool for that. It was interesting being in a class so that, there's me, a 43-year-old ex-squaddy and a bunch of 18-year-olds who were being funded by the bank and mum and dad through the training, who were constantly late, and they used to drive me bananas, and I was like, come on, lads, 5 minutes before, the teachers are here to teach us. So I did that, and then I did my commercial pilot's license in November 2015, somehow passed it, blagged it, and then I went on to do a free instructor rating, which I found actually really interesting and not too hard. I was a driving instructor in the Army back in my RCT days. So the instructor role was like really, really cool. And it was really easy to do, great course. And I started off at a place in Essex, Stapleford Flight Centre, as a freelance flying instructor there. And what I did is I just spent a year, got a bit of experience under my belt, learnt the trade. And then I started spreading my wings and doing ferry flights around the UK for people. And I did find that there was a lot of pilots, PPL pilots, who would get the pilot's license and then, they'd take the mum and dad up, they'd take the mates up, they'd fly down to Headcorn or somewhere, have a cup of tea, and then go, I haven't got the confidence to go anywhere else. And the license would lapse. So I noticed there was a little bit of a sort of gap in the market. So that's why I sort of stepped in and started offering my services as a safety pilot and saying, come on, I will fly with you. You do the flying, basically, and I'll keep you on the straight and narrow and make sure you don't, do anything nasty. And that has gone from strength to strength. And I'm now basically taking people all around Europe. I've been down to Spain, over to Poland, Lithuania, Denmark, all the way around Scotland, right up to the Shetland Islands. I've been around the UK, around the coastline numerous times. I've even been down as far as Croatia, down to Dubrovnik and into Sarajevo. And that was quite bizarre, to fly around Sarajevo speaking to Banja Luka air traffic control. I don't think they were based in the metal factory, but speaking to them and landed at Sarajevo, which was just weird, just surreal. And then flying over the old routes and looking down, I think I used to drive down there in my truck, and it was brilliant. And I'm still planning to do it because I think I've come into flying late, and I'm almost like I'm trying to make up for it. So I'm trying to get the hours in, trying to get the experience in, and just pushing it. And I'll keep going as long as my medical allows, Did
you ever fancy the helicopter pilot training in the Air Corps? Did that never cross your mind when you were serving?
It did appear, but it came after my little stint down at my selection for air dispatch, and I just thought, I'm colourblind. They won't take me because then it was you looked at the old dotted numbers, and if you're colourblind, that was it. They were just like, get the next person in. I'd have loved to have done that, but it wasn't to be. Yeah, so never interested in going the airline route. It just looks a little bit boring, So I've come to the party a bit late. The airline pilots are good at what they do, but they're just flying to destinations and back. I've got a couple of guys who have taught who've gone on to become airline pilots, and I ask them, what did you do today? And they said, oh, I flew to Naples. And I say, you didn't really, did you? Because you've landed and you've not even got out the cockpit and you've come straight back. So you've not really gone to Naples, have you?
So what's your company called, James, and how can people find you?
So it's Buddies Aviation. Just Google that. It should turn up. I've got a Twitter account, James Lee, Buddies Aviation again. If people are flying out there, or again, if anybody's sort of military getting out, I have chatted to a few guys. Again, stuff they didn't teach me on the resettlements was, about starting your own business. That was a big thing when I initially looked at it. But when I started doing it, you work it out and it's not particularly that hard. And I actually found a way, because I sunk a lot of money into this. I basically sunk with resettlements, the old golden handshake into it. It's not cheap to get a commercial license, just the one I was getting with single engine aircraft. You're not getting much change out of 70k. So I sunk my golden handshake into that. I completed it. And basically, when I got to the end of it, I was pretty broke. There was no money left in the bank. I was actually short by a little bit, and I contacted a few friends for the loan, and they were, I'm not too sure. And to be honest, I'll give them a big shout out. I contacted SAFA, and I'll tell you, fantastic. Within 3 days, they paid the last of the training costs.
Oh, wow.
Which, brilliant of them,
Yeah,
It's
not something you'd normally think of, would you?
Well, no, it just came to me, and what they did, I think they went out to all the charities, and I think it was one of the old, might have been the RLC charity, remember the old one-day pay giving scheme? I think it came out of that. Yeah. So they went round and said, look, we've got a guy, ex-RLC, he just needs the last couple of grand to finish this train, he's got a job. And I can't remember who it was, but they stepped up and said, yeah, we'll pay it. And very, very grateful of that. That was fantastic. And then the other thing I worked out was that if I do this as a business, I can claim all the VAT back. So probably did that, claimed the VAT back. So, saved 20% on all these training costs. Got hauled in by the HMRC for an interview, which was scary initially, but it was interesting. They just wanted to see that I existed. And I wasn't just somebody in a far-off foreign country making it up and claiming the VAT back on a load of fictitious training. I went in there quite nervous, and they were quite cool, and they were quite interested, actually. We ended up talking about flying for a bit. Yeah, and it's worked out really well. And I say, I've invested the money, I've made the money back, and it's just going from strength to strength. There is literally not enough hours in the day to fly sometimes. Even today, I've taken, not just today, in the last few days, I've taken about 3 weeks worth of bookings, and push it on social media, like with the book. Social media can be a great tool. It's free. You don't pay for it. And word gets round, and it's I pick up work from that, and the book sales, that they're going away quite nicely.
Good stuff, mate. Excellent.
Are there any other books in the pipeline? And what's your advice to us budding authors, all of us who've got a book in us?
Yeah, there is another book in the pipeline. To be honest, there's several books in the pipeline. One's in the pipeline, and the other two are in my head. So I'm started work on the second book, which I'm going to do about my first tour of Bosnia in '96 when I was a driver. Keeping the old I-4, the implementation force supplied with fuel gas, and like we said, the emergency runs of plastic cutlery up to Banja Luka, and cleaning the toilets, whilst at the weekends working on my tan down the beach. So yeah, that's being under production, and obviously the more terrible weather we have, the quicker I'll write it. I've got another one another idea for a book about the flying, and I'm going to do that as a series of short stories. Because again, I take this military humour with me, and once a soldier, always a soldier. And some of the things we've got up to at airports, brilliant. We've blagged our way into airports. Things we've got into trouble for, we've been shouted at. You take it with a pinch of salt. We've once we went into Inverness. We won't go into Inverness, but it's like £50 to land at Inverness unless you weather divert there. So we flew to a little airfield not far from Inverness that's behind a hill, and they can't see us on radar. So I hope the Inverness guys aren't listening. So we flew behind this hill and we dropped in there, no problems. And we got some fuel there because the fuel is a lot cheaper at this airfield than Inverness. And then we took off again, and then we called them up on the radio and said, we've been trying to land for 15 minutes, but it's really, really foggy. Can we divert into you? And they said, yeah, in you come. So, we saved 50 quid. And I remember pulling up to park up, and the guy came out and said, do you need any fuel? And we said, no, we're good. And literally the aircraft have got like a breather pipe on them. And the fuel was dripping out the breather pipe because we'd filled it right up to the brim and then popped in. So, I'll do a book about that. And I think hopefully a lot of military and a lot of, pilots will, see the funny side of it. And we'll see anyway. That's in my head at the moment. The advice for budding authors, yeah, I'm going to repeat myself what I was told. You've just got to get writing, and it's that simple. Make time to write as well. Try and get rid of any distractions. Dump the mobile phones. There's nothing worse than procrastinating. It'll eat into your time, so dump the phone. Like I said, I used to go over the pub, leave the phone at home, and I could easily knock out 2,000 words a day. Try and set a target for words each day, and just get on doing with it. Amazon's a great way to get your book out there as well. It's superb, but I would definitely ensure some help. Well, I'd suggest getting some help if you've not done it before. You want a good looking product at the end. So find an editor. The money you pay is going to be a good investment. Same with, I have seen some books on Amazon written by some guy. I'm not going to say names. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But I've seen some books, and when you do the look inside and the spelling mistakes, I'm not saying there are in mine because, I've proofread mine, and I've had friends and family and my editors proofread it. And I'm sure somebody looked in there, they could find a spelling mistake because you are literally just cut and pasting a Word document. So, spend a bit of money, try and get it looking good. I was offered a few hybrid contracts, what they call a hybrid contract with companies. The problem with them is because you're a new author, what they say is, you give us a chunk of money up front, we'll produce your book, and we will put it out there for you. And I read the reviews of these companies, and some were okay, but they seem to have a 50-50 reviews, 50% good reviews, 50% bad. I think with publishing, I'm no expert on this, but I was chatting to a guy who actually got a book deal, and he was getting paid not a lot per book. With Amazon, you keep a lot more of the profit. Plus, I think with Amazon, if you self-publish, you're freer to do what you want. So it's a bit of give and take. The marketing is being done by myself. Again, like I said, using social media, that is a superb bit of kit, which I've used as much as we can. You guys obviously saw me on my military Twitter account. They all posted to BAOR, and we took base, and here we are, and hopefully it will go on. And I want to take the book up quite as far as I can go. I'm up to about just over 1,200 books sold now, or read. I think some are doing the rounds out there. People are now selling them secondhand on eBay. which is it's good to see, but I'm not getting any money out of it. But it's not in for the money, and it is good to think that people out there, and you get the reviews, and it is good to think that you're making people laugh.
What did your editor make of the title of the book?
He was on holiday at the time, and I emailed him and said, "Look, I've got this book." And he literally, I think he said he was eating at the time. He just said it put him off his dinner. But he said he did want to know more. He did want to know more. But he thought it was quite good. I'm hoping it catches people's eyes.
Oh, I think it definitely does. Certainly, from my own perspective as a former soldier, it draws your attention straight away.
Yeah, and the second book, I've got a good title for it. I'm not going to say it on air just yet, but yeah, I've come up with a fairly good one on there that will, I think, will make people giggle. And that's what it's about. I'm trying to get the old military humour over there. It's that is probably one of the best qualities of the British Army.
No, I mean, I read it and enjoyed it, James. And that's why we got you in the pod. So, really get to the meat of the matter now. Where can people get hold of a copy? You just want to summarise? I know you said a couple of locations, but summarise it again for people.
Yeah, so if you need to get hold of the book, if you just go onto Amazon, type in "Licking the Taliban's Flip-Flop," it'll be there. I do a sign-in service as well. If you go on to posted_to_BAOR, you'll find me on there. You can send me a DM. That'll come straight through to me. And I started last Christmas doing signed copies, which proved quite popular. And this Christmas I started doing signed copies with an insult, which has proved even more popular.
Funny that.
So you get the old insult, oh, can you write Craig as a so-and-so? What was the last one I had? Craig as a war dodging so-and-so. I was like, yeah, no worries. I had a lady contact me. She said, oh, I need one for my son. He's a lazy little thing. So can you put something in there? And she contacted me and said, oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, and that's proved pretty good, and it's just trying to get that, trying to get a little bit of a different niche on it. I'm trying to keep away from the typical military book. It's all a bit of a laugh,
Yeah, no, it's good, mate. And I'll put all those social media links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, and we spoke about this before. I definitely think you need to approach Soldier Mag because they do book reviews, especially from ex-military authors. And that will expand it in the military circle as well. And a lot of people, like Colin says, the title will entice them to pick up a copy.
Yeah,
Go on, sorry, James, go on, mate. No, go on.
I was going to say, I've picked up on a few things. The Army Rumour website contact me, and they did a book review, which was pretty cool. I've done a couple of local talks with the local WI and round table people. Now, my reasoning behind that was I've done about 4 presentations with them. I've done 4 different presentations because I'm hoping this year to try and get into a couple of literary festivals. So I use these WI talks just to hone the old skills. One was okay, one wasn't okay. I did one the other night, went down really well. So the literary festivals, again, trying to get in there is quite hard. A couple of local ones here, contacted them. Again, new author, a little bit wary, but I'm going to keep pushing. So hopefully this year I might be out there. And again, I don't know. I don't know what you're supposed to do. There's no book anyway. If anybody's written a book about what you're supposed to do, I'll have a read. But like we do in the army, we just cuff it and we get away with it. And like I keep saying, things happen for a reason.
I think you just got to be Nicky, mate. Push your way forwards. Look, the Soldier magazine piece, we had Kev became a media whore and sold himself out to Soldier magazine. We had an article in the podcast and they didn't approach us. We just knocked on their door and said, hey, can you do a thing about us?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, the other thing I've got in mind as well, I've thought about doing a script writing course and could I get this down, the Licking the Taliban's flip-flop as a script? And that's another one I've got in the sort of back burner as well. Again, it's just finding the time. So I've got to try and find the course, like we do in the military, we cuff it. I'll quickly go and do a 3-4 week script writing course and go, right, that'll do. Let's see if we can get it down. And who knows, it'd be brilliant to see it on the TV. It might happen, it might not, but, think big. You never know.
Exactly, mate. And if Brad Pitt's not available, I've heard Kev's going pretty cheap.
People often ask me, who'd you like to play me? And I think
go on then. Who would you say?
It would have to be Stephen Graham.
Oh yeah, great actor. Yeah.
He could probably do he's got the accent. He's from up that way anyway, So I think he would be pretty good.
Kev, you're out of job, mate. You're not even third choice.
I have a face for radio. Well, moving on. James, thank you very much. And then we come to the special part of the podcast, which is Desert Island Dits. So, James, your choice of book, film, and luxury item, please.
Well, book choice would have to be my book. I'll take a few hundred and I'd sell them to the locals. Get a bit of cash. No, I'd probably take anything by Spike Milligan, to be honest. It's always a pleasure to read his little writings. It's good. I've got a couple of his books on the go all the time, and he's done a lot of other stuff. He's done his letters and other plays. Brilliant stuff. I think film choice, Gone with the Wind. Literally just because it's a long film. I'm guessing we're going to be on this desert island for a long time, so that's probably about the longest film I can think of. That would
I thought you'd be able to make yourself a glider, mate, and just, get out of there.
Yeah, hope so. Luxury item, I'll take my partner.
Can't take your partner.
Okay. Probably my slippers then. I do suffer from the old cold feet. A lot of people will probably been there before, riding the old motorbikes around Germany in the winter, in just a pair of the old combat eyes, because, Germany's not the Arctic, even though it was like -20. My feet have never been the same since. So, yeah, slippers, because I get cold feet. Even when I'm on holiday in hot places, my feet get really cold.
There's an obvious joke there about being in Kandahar and slippers, mate, but I'm not going to stoop that low.
So, Colin, your choice this podcast?
So my choice is Picking Up the Brass by Eddy Nugent, a book I said that, I found it quite similar to James's. And the pen name's actually two blokes who are ex-Royal Signals, and they combined their experiences to write the books, and they're called Ian Deacon and Charlie Bell. And I think if MD joined up in the 80s, and that's all three of us, it would ring a bell for them. I joined up in 85, and that was the same year that both these guys joined up. And they cover basic training. They both went to P Company and failed that, so they get sent to the Signals Regiment out in Germany. They also did another book called Map of Africa about a tour in Belize, and some of it is just absolutely laugh out loud hilarious. And they even cover some old haunts that people might recognise, like Raoul's Rose Garden. I'm sure if listeners have been there, raise your hand. The second book's got a brilliant review on Amazon, and this person wrote in and said, "It was just drinking and swearing on every page, which became very boring after a time. Perhaps this is what soldiers do, but there's no need to boast about it." I thought, I'll buy that on the review alone. So
that'll do.
Had a few, exactly, mate. You said you had people calling you Renf, James. Have you generally had quite good reviews?
Yeah, no, the Renf calling was on. It was on social media. I think it was on Twitter. But yeah, the reviews have generally been quite good. I get it; it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I've had a couple of not so great reviews on there, but the guys who are writing them are ex-military, so I don't know, green-eyed monster. Who knows? But yeah, everyone's entitled to the choice. You're not going to please everybody.
Just redirect them to Bravo 20, mate. That's obviously what they're after.
Yeah, maybe.
And that's the biggest work of fiction going. So, Kev, what have you chosen? Sorry, go on, James.
Sorry, I was going to say, how did he get there?
Yeah.
Uber put him on a plane.
So, Kev, what's your choice?
My choice is a book called Taking on Gravity by Richard Browning. And this is the story of groundbreaking innovation, something the UK is famous for, was famous for, post-Second World War, into the 70s, the hovercraft, the Harrier jump jet, Concorde, the Vulcan bomber. And he built an aviation business in his garage, and he's the one that has made the Iron Man jetpack.
Oh, not the jetpack, mate. You're obsessed with this.
I just think absolutely fantastic idea. And the way he's took it from a garage into a multi-million-pound industry, and he's advertised it, it's brilliant. At YouTube, it's all over that. And I just think it's the innovation and the imagination of this individual and his team, and the developments that may come off it, and what it could be used for. Now, he's doing a lot of work with the Navy. He's a Royal Marine reservist, or was, and so he's doing a lot of work with the Royal Marines about it. And I just think it's got potential for a lot of stuff, and they've used it on mountain rescue exercises as well, where the individual in the suit goes forward, does the recce, and finds the individual before the rest of the team manage to scramble up the mountain or find the individual as well. I just think worth a read. It just shows Britain at its best as well, when we are good at innovation, when we do put our mind to it. We just seem to have lost that.
But we normally invent it and then sell it on to another country.
We do.
Millions out of it.
You know, when you look at the jet engine, when you look at the Second World War innovations, when you look at post-Second World War, you know, when you have a Concorde that, you know, in the 1970s, you know, Mark II sort of speeds, we just have that ability to do stuff. And sometimes maybe as a country we knock ourselves more than we support the innovation that we are world famous for.
Yeah, maybe these are the guys we need to get on the resettlement circuit, you know, giving talks. You know, I'd be happy to go and give a talk and just, you know, if you get enough people and just say, you know, this is what you could do. You know, you don't have to go into health and safety.
That's a great idea, though, James. And why don't they get people like yourself who took a measured risk and invested a lot of money into doing it, and what you've achieved? I think getting people like you in is far more inspirational than you just say, God, go and do a health and safety course.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I think, you know, there's lots of ex-forces that have gone really, really well.
Yeah, you know, I might contact them, send them an email at some point.
Yeah, you should do, mate. If you've got a local resettlement, I think it'd be really useful.
Yeah, well, right. Here's a copy of my book.
Exactly, mate. And a consultancy fee of £100 an hour. So that's it for another episode. Thanks for coming on the podcast, James. And to you, the listener, for your continued support and suggestions, please keep them coming. And our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes, as always. And I'll put James's links down there as well. You can find us on all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you've downloaded us from iTunes and like the podcast, it'd be great if you could leave us a review there or anywhere you get your podcasts from. And finally, thanks again to Nick Beale for his continuing support to the series and offering technical help through his company ISAR. And we'll see you next time on The Unconventional Soldier.